Am I on now?
Yes.
We were down at the law school, and several of us got up and asked you some questions. And I don't know if you remember those questions, but let me just take you back and sort of summarize what those questions were the last time we saw you. So we had noticed that the jail pop was decreasing. And because it was decreasing, each person has a dollar amount associated with the cost to house them at the jail. And so that money could have been thought of as being retrieved back and accumulated in order to put somewhere else for other programs. As you saw each one of the students stand up and say, I see this is going down, let's retrieve the money back. And when we retrieve the money back, all of these things that we need for housing and mentors, and we could use it for that. They were each suggesting to you. Do you remember that?
I do remember well.
Yeah. And so
I just say it was one of the few groups I talked to where people talked about how to pay for something.
And you're going to see us, this is going to be a theme today.
Which I appreciated greatly.
But also at that time, if you remember the last student and the youngest student who talked to you about the budget, you remember she said the budget is 800 pages long, and if you remember that last student, well, she was the student that mentioned to you DCAS. And she was the student that said to you, I really feel like we ought to have TANF and food stamps and Medicaid workers down there loading that information into DCAS. And that would have gotten rid of the problem that we were having with respect to MORCA, which isn't able to capture their data. So that's what she was suggesting. And then that same student suggested to you, really there needs to be a better way for the community and seniors to communicate with you, a more formal way, because we noticed that the previous year we had had a conversation, and it's almost as if we begun to have sword fights where we would do our PowerPoint and you would do your PowerPoint, and then that would be it, and people would walk away. At one point we had 250 people, but nothing resulted from it. And so one of the reasons why we invited you to the classroom this time, rather than having all of those people, is that we wanted to have a more intimate conversation with you, and we wanted you to respond back to us with what your thoughts are, and we wanted to build a relationship with you, and we're hoping you'll see some things on here where we have asked this time. I'm not certain that we had asked down at the other one, but we really feel like we could, you'll see on the slides today, join with the National Community Service. And who are they? They'll be here with us on this Wednesday. But they're the people that are AmeriCorps, Senior Corps, Vista Corps. They give volunteers. And so those volunteers could become mentor navigators. And then you also see us saying that they have a component of the National Community Service has a component of it that deals with corporations, where they get corporations to volunteer their employees. So you'll be seeing on the screen, our ask of you is to work with us over here at UDC, to get AmeriCorps involved, and you'll see the way in which we want you to get those volunteers involved so that we don't end up without the mentor navigators, and so that we don't end up without the corporations more heavily involved. All right, and so that's just sort of a preliminary conversation. Our first person isn't up, so I'm going to do theirs, isn't here yet, and so I'm going to do their slide for you. Ms. Tuck, could you take the lighting down? Is it okay for us to take that lighting down?
Yes.
That's his light.
Oh, that's his light.
Yeah. that's his-
Should I turn my light on? Because that's gonna, I won't be able to capture you if I turn this on, so you'll call.
Maybe turn on one light to, I guess, cut that one off, turn on one light to kind of balance out.
Let's turn the bright light off for the moment. Which are,
Is that better?
no, you can go ahead and turn it
No,
down
that's fine.
for the moment.
Oh, turn it down.
Turn it all the way down for the moment.
Okay. How's that? Is that okay?
Because I think he's going to do these separately. You're going to do the slides separately, where he'll pick up the slides.
Yes.
So we're showing you our process right now. The process, they start with me, this time they started with me August 26th, just before Labor Day. Most universities start. And so when they start with me, this is our process. They look at best practices. And so each of them I got nothing. I'm gonna have to move it by hand, I think. It was, will you move it? Okay. So each one of them was placed in an organization. They chose the organization that public safety organization that they wanted to belong to. And the very first thing that they did was to determine whether or not that particular agency was using a best practice. It's not enough to use a best practice because best practices have characteristics to them. And so they would list the characteristics of the best practice, and then they compared that to DC to see that DC was using all of the components. So it's not enough to have a best practice, you have to use all of the components. A missing component could be the crucial component, which would decide whether or not you really were operating or not. So for each one of them, for each of the agencies, they did a really good thing for us, which was to determine if they were using it, all of the components of it, for each agency that we did. And then after they got their set of readings and their readings told them what the best practice was, what the components were, they listed them, then they wrote a paper. And the paper had to have at least 10 references, and the paper had to be in APA format. You were undergraduates, so they had to write it in a certain style with an abstract and references, etc. And they take me for stat, and so they had to have whatever that agency's stats were. They had to do mean, median, mode, variance, standard deviation, etc. on that. And then they do oral presentations at midterm and at final. They also do one other presentation, is they compete for the undergraduate award. I think I mentioned this to you when I came to visit with you about 6 weeks ago, that it's campus-wide. So we're competing with biology and chemistry, and those guys got spectacular things going on when we're competing. We've been successful at getting third place, but part of the way that you get first place is that you can show that officials such as yourself understood it, acknowledged it, and were willing to do some part of what you were recommending. And so we've not been able to demonstrate that up till now, that we've had an impact upon city officials. So these are just some preliminary stats that we wanted to start off with, and this is sort of our rationale for everything else we're going to say. Over here, stats that you know really well. This is DC's jail stats taken right off of their website. Notice that most of the people in DC jail are black, and most of them are male. And most of them, if you look at this bottom part, are less than 30 years old. But in average, they're 32 years old. And not only that, most of them are coming out of 7 and 8. These are all straight off of you guys' website. And the reason why we're pointing that out is that some people would say, is there nobody else committing crimes in the city except for these guys? And some people would say, is there nobody else committing crimes except for 7 and 8? And so that's why we wanted to reiterate what this is part of our rationale for everything else that we're going to say is when we look at who's in the DC jail. Really important part here is that they're in jail not for what the city attends to, which is homicides. They're mostly in jail for various sorts of theft, for vehicle theft, for theft. And so these are really, and one of the other things we want to point out is that they've been successful at bringing down their pop. Less and less of them are going to jail, and less of them are recidivating. This is off of CSOSA's website, so we can see less go to jail and less recidivate. And these slides, back up one, give us our rationale. It's the reason why we feel we ought to help this particular set of people. This is the reason. They're young. To be a senator, you have to be 30 years old. To be a president, you have to be 35 years old. And what is that telling you? That's telling you that you have to get a certain amount of experience under your belt. And therefore these are young people that should be retrieved and should be helped because they are so young and they're doing thefts, not violent crimes. And they have been successful at reducing their pop and their recidivism. That's our rationale for everything else we're going to say. Because there are some people in the city who do not want to help this type of inmate. Next slide, please.
Sorry, next presenter is Dayton.
Let's see if it'll work. Still not working. We got it to work, huh? We put new batteries in, but it's not.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dayton Air. I'm a senior here at UDC, and for my senior paper, my topic is housing solutions. As you can see, we have 41,000 individuals on the public housing waiting list. We have between public housing and vouchers, we have 21,000 vouchers for these individuals. 11,000 of these individuals were homeless in 2015. And of that 11,000, roughly 1,000 of them were on probation and parole. Now, we all know that returning citizens do not have first preference when it comes to public housing. First preference goes to individuals with disabilities and victims of domestic violence, just to name a few. And if the individuals think they can go to surrounding states, let's say Maryland, for example, you have to be a resident of that state in order to get on their public housing list. So the issue we have here, DC lacks permanent housing capacity. So my solution is, we have, here in the district, we have numerous vacant and blighted buildings. The Office of Partnerships and Grant Services have crowdsourcing templates, but they do not have a religious crowdsourcing template. So we have Enterprise. Enterprise package deals and gets organizations to partner together. Enterprise can partner with the faith-based organizations that have property here in the district, for which we have 700 faith-based organizations, but only 70 of them participate in the housing development program. Enterprise can get that 630 to partner with the 70 to create a religious crowdsourcing site for which they can contribute money into. And when they contribute money to this site, they have created their own bank. Enterprise also can partner with the Washington Regional Association of Grant Makers to acquire grants to contribute to the religious crowdsourcing site, for which we can use those monies to revitalize the vacant and blighted buildings here in the district. And when you revitalize these vacant and blighted buildings, you get rid of the eyesores in the community, the property value in that community will skyrocket, and you have created more housing, which we need here in the district. So my question to you, after class, if we could talk about how we can make this vision a reality.
Okay.
Thank you.
Foley.
You turn it.
It was part of the reason why we wanted Ms. Chung to come, because she's,
You got it or you want me to?
What do you think?
It's not question.
It's not good? Good morning, Deputy Mayor.
Good
Good
morning.
morning, class. How are you today? My name is Michael Coley. My senior paper pretty much was about the faith base and having solutions for mental navigators, for CSOSA, and also for the returning citizens that are re-entering the community in Washington, D.C. As you can see, in 2015, the numbers that were released from the Federal Bureau of Prisons and Parole, that almost 1,600 individuals was released back into the city, returned citizens. Since 2002, only 1,322 mentors have been matched over that 13-year period. Right now, as it stands in 2015, 2 years ago, only 53 mentors were available. That was for CSOSA. That was the load that they were handling. So as part of my solutions, we have a number of entities that thought it would be best to have more of a volunteer-based solution that didn't necessarily require city money. The first to start with, I will start with the Office of External Affairs, Corporation for National and Community Service, Senior Corps, Job Corps, AmeriCorps. They institute a lot of volunteers. They also help programs like DC Serve with volunteers. And DC Serve primarily serves 18 and under, what we're speaking of for the returning citizens that are 18 and over, because there are not really too many programs that cater to them once they are released. So that's why we're trying to collaborate these two entities so that DC Serve can start helping return the citizens above 18, since they're primarily 18 and under. Also, we have Mr. Thomas Bowen from the Mayor Office of Religious Affairs within the classroom, presented this same material, and he was very engaged about collaborative efforts among DC Serve, AmeriCorps, Job Corps, Senior Corps, to pull the resources together to provide more mentors for the individuals that are returning home from the Bureau system, the Federal Bureau system of prisons. Also, as another option, we have Philanthropy Promise, who we've also had Ms. Janae Richmond within our classroom. She oversees and helps with, getting volunteers through philanthropy and making sure that the philanthropists are doing their part to engage with having volunteers to help with individuals in low poverty communities and returning citizens to reintegrate back into, the society. Also, we had Professor and Dr. Edgar Kahns, who created the Time Bank. And a time bank is for, we want to say individuals, we might say of all walks of life, but who have a skill set that can help. And as opposed to it being a monetary thing, it's more so a volunteer thing where, like she explained to you earlier, an employer may, use this employee, or this employee may volunteer and may receive some type of compensation, or within their own community or organization. So, for example, in your office, if someone volunteers, they may get an extra leave day to help with the community. So he brought this up because it was for returning citizens to help them. Because at that time, no programs were really helping them. So he pulled it together, and now it has flourished over a period of time that entities are involved with using volunteers to, get time back, and more so than a monetary thing.
Grants.
And this is, okay, I'm glad you brought that up. And this is federal grant money. As we all know, the city can apply for federal grant money to help with programs. And this is also another tool that we're looking at as a collaborative effort for all, to put all the resources together to try to get more mentors. So that this number here shouldn't be matched with this number here. It should always be even keel or 1 for every 4, so that it could be one-on-one to reintegrate and have someone to show them how to reintegrate into the city, to cut down on the recidivism. Because the more mentors you have, our ultimate goal is to cut down the recidivism. It'll give somebody a role model to look up to instead of reverting back to their old ways. So these are the solutions that I came up with in my senior paper for mental navigations. Hopefully you'll find them interesting, and maybe you can decide that you can pull all these groups together in some form or fashion to bring that number up and assist the return of citizens. Thank you for your time.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
The 53 mentors, that's at CSOSA?
Yes, that's a
Is that,
seesaw. Apologize.
Individuals on payroll or volunteers with CSOSA?
Those
Volunteers.
They're volunteers?
Those are volunteers,
Okay.
primarily from the churches.
Okay.
And we know that you have many more down at the jail, but he understood
Oh,
that you guys have them at the jail, but these guys over at CSOSA, that 1,592 over at CSOSA, that's all they have over there.
Okay. Thank you.
yes, sir.
The student not here. I'm going to walk through hers for her. So she's telling you right here that there were 25,700 residents looking for a job in the city in 2016, that 15,000 of them went over to Department of Employment Services seeking work of the 25,000. That 3,700 over at CSOSA, not talking about the ones at jail, 3,700 of the 225,700 needed a job. So these are being counted as part of this. This is their competition for jobs. This is their competition for jobs. There are other people in the city looking for jobs, many of the jobs you're saying. You guys did 450 mediations, banned the box mediations, but notice the number of mediations that were done compared to the number that were out there looking for a job and competing with the rest of the city. And so we don't have the number. If all of these guys were out there looking for a job, we don't know how many of them were really in need of mediation. We only know the one number of the number that were mediated. And I've asked these students to always have two numbers, that you always got to know your total amount and relative to your total amount, how much you did. And so, Jasmine, if you would come and help me with... and so we know that 360 of those got over to Project Empowerment, who was assisting them with employment. So now we're on the employment piece, and I'm doing it for a student. I have an early class, and so the train causes us all kinds of problems all the time. So this was her problem statement. You can see once again, just like the other two, there's a capacity problem, a capacity to serve the amount of need that you have. Next slide.
Oh, sorry.
And just like on housing, they don't have preference. These guys, these 3,700 don't have preference for the job because veterans have preference. And for employers, experienced people have preference. So they have to compete with others that are experienced. And so we know that we have Aspire here in the city that's for entrepreneurship, next one. We know that we have apprenticeships over at Department of Employment Services. But really, we feel like you ought to be looking at employer accountability. Next one, please. Because notice that each of this is DC, this is Virginia and Maryland, and notice the number of things that we watch with respect to our employer. They're all vacant. 2 of them are accounted for. But relative to the other cities, we really don't look at employers in very careful ways with respect to who they hire, especially those that we give contracts to with the promise that they will hire our residents. The 2 surrounding states are more vigilant in looking at whether or not that employer actually hires within the city. And then there are social impact bonds, and this is her solution that she's offering here to this problem of not having employer accountability, of having employers actually become more involved with the returning citizens through social impact bonds. And she's proposing that some employers give their employees a sabbatical, and that's one of her. So she actually has 2 things that she's proposing, one of which is social impact bonds, and we had Katie Moore in to speak to us about doing social impact bonds, and she's willing to work with you on doing social impact bonds. And she also spoke to us about corporate service corps and employee sabbaticals. So each one of them had to propose a solution, and it had to be a non-public, non-governmental solution. So you see social impact bonds where you're dealing with those private employers, and you're looking at employee sabbaticals. That's not on your time. So how do we move forward? We know that the Washington Post has been writing public safety and CJCC pretty hard. In December, they had a series where they were pretty negative towards public safety. One of the things that we know when we go towards solutions is that the budget that we have, that $13 billion budget that we have, is pretty much accounted for. It's pretty much allotted. We know we have a rainy day fund, but that's could be considered allotted. So the local budget is already allocated, and I guess we're going through the budget process now.
Tomorrow, the mayor will formally submit the FY18 budget
Right,
to the city council and to the public.
right. And so that money will be allocated, and some of that, this money pot may grow for you, I suspect. And so that's the allocation that there is. And one of the other things that we know, one more, Jasmine, is we may get some federal budget cuts soon. It's a possibility. So with money already allocated and with the federal budget possibility, we were one of the states, as you'll see in a minute on another slide. Is she here yet? No. On another slide, you'll see that with respect to Medicaid, right, that Affordable Care Act, and if they ever change that Affordable Care Act, it will affect the Medicaid part of it because we were one of the states that accepted Medicaid. Next slide, please. A student who did jail, and you saw him last year indicating that the POP was going down, and with respect to it going down, there was an associated money accrued from that. POP's going down on both components of your jail POP, and that too has money associated with. And so when you're constantly searching for money because you might get that federal cut and you don't, and the rest of it's already allocated. And he's suggesting here that it's already allocated on the basis of what you said last year. Next slide, please. Is that you were thinking about, or there had been an architect who had made a rendition, a image for you. We paid the architect $5 million to give us this drawing, and
I did not pay an architect $5 million to give me.
that's what, after Washington Post, they're carrying that story.
I know what I'm saying. I didn't pay anyone $5 million related to that. Just
Hold please. Right back. So this is where we're getting this story from. And they carried us as law students last year, so they get things wrong. If you saw that Washington Post story, they said the law students were presenting to you, not the undergraduate students. So they do get things wrong. Next slide, please. And so that's the reason why we began to look at the nonprofit philanthropy. But we knew that these guys, Community Foundation, since 2000 had given $568 million in the city, but most of that went to children. It did not go to the people that we're thinking of over at CSOSA. This organization totally on their website says that they've given $40 million since 2000. These are our two biggest ones within the city that are huge foundations, huge philanthropists. And so we began to look at the Office of Partnerships and Grants. And on their website, right in this writing, it says that there were 431 grant opportunities with the potential awards of $4.4 billion was out there for us to take a look at and decide if we wanted to go after it. That's what these words that you cannot see say. And how much did we go after? They say on their website we went after 17 million. When we see that they went after 17 million when there was 4.4 billion after that, we wonder whether they're going after as much as they could go after. And that's part of the reason why you heard us say the Justice Reinvestment Grant was one of those opportunities that they did not go after last year. And so we feel like there could be minimal civic engagement, minimal nonprofit grant making ability out there. And next slide, please. And so this is part of the solution that CJCC invited in a person to take a look at the city and to make recommendations about what should be done in the city so that there were, some people would call it reform, but if you were on campus the other night, the president of UDC and I led campus-wide to say it really shouldn't be reform, it should be reconstruction. And so I think there's, reconstruction is the word that you want to use. And what might you do in terms of not reform, but reconstruction in the city in terms of criminal justice? So right now, we have some of our people over at CSOSA in halfway houses, and that costs the federal government at least some money to house them in, but that's temporary housing for 2 years or so. And there's also the DC jail treatment component of it is temporary housing, and that cost us. Some of them, that 1,080 that Air talked about, next one, are housed at our homeless shelter, but that homeless shelter cost, and it costs, this cost here is not just the beds or the people that are in those institutions, but that cost has the number of times we arrest them, the number of times they go to the emergency room, that cost has all of that included in it. But shelters are temporary. And one way to look at this amount is if you divided that 31,000 by 12 months, they would actually be paying $2,500 in rent per month. So that's another way to look at that 31,000. Why not just put them in a place and rent it out rather than pay the 31,000? Safer.
31,000 the CSOSA cost for housing, or just I want to understand.
31,000 is for a person to be in a homeless shelter.
Homeless shelter. Okay.
That's the CSOSA. That 1080 was what Air talked about. Were in need of housing. In need of housing. They carry 18,000 over there, but 1,000 of that 18,000. One way to look at it is a success story because they're carrying 18,000 over a year, and 1,000 of that 18,000. That's a success story. But if you're part of the 1,000, it wouldn't be so successful for you. And 1,000 is a large number. So he proposed Safer Foundation at 38,000 $8,000 per person. He has something he calls transitional housing. To me, when I read about it, it looks very much like a halfway house. It'd be hard for me to distinguish Safer's transitional housing from a halfway house. But these are the prices that are associated with each of these options, and really what the conversation should be is which one of these options is the option we ought to go with. And one of the things that we saw was that Georgetown University, Edelman, the other part of Marion Wright Edelman, he produced a 2016 article, and in that article it says, and I brought it with me to hand it to you, that Safer Foundation, they used a control group with it, and it was not capable of reducing recidivism in Chicago. Safer Foundation is out of Chicago. I think that might be the city where they said that, where Trump said he was going to. So this is the Safer Foundation doing this business. But then there was ours, where we were saying, what we looked at here is the amount of cost that it would cost to build a unit. And so it costs that amount to build a unit in this city. If you look here, we put in our city, and it's that amount to build a unit for a single person. And so with that amount to build one, we're not even talking about as Air's proposal is to gut it, to renovate it. And we're talking here, to build it would cost this amount. And so you say that's substantially larger than that amount, except that if you're doing that year after year after year, you're going to eventually get to that amount and you won't have permanent housing. And so that's our argument on that, for why we might not want to go with Safer, and we might not want to go with homeless shelters, and we might not want to go with jails, which are also, the treatment side of jail is also temporary housing. And so one of the things that we were looking at, just drop back one, Jasmine, is that if you go with this, how would you ever in the world be able to do such a thing? How would you get that capital investment to be able to do such a thing? If you even wanted to, you'd have to have a will to want to build permanent housing rather than temporary housing. Down one. And so what we know is that, as she spoke of on her State of the Union address the other day, we have DOPA, which is the District Opportunity to Purchase Act. And with that act, the district buys properties when they are foreclosed, etc. And one of the things that we know is that this set of buildings, there were 13 buildings, it's the Eismore Courtyard, that property fell into default in 2010 and was sold at auction. And the city could have picked that up, but we didn't. And so if you're looking for these large things could house that 1080, you're saying, where in the world would we do such a thing? There are such a things becoming available. When we look at this one, this is the Mayberry Plaza. It's got 672 units in it. You're saying, how can I house 1080? It's got 672 units in it. In 2010, the owners could not make the $5 million capital investments in it, and therefore they went delinquent on a $40 million loan, and we could have picked that property up. And so one of the things that we're saying is that there is a way for the city to pick up, if there's the will, there's the way, to pick up that amount. And so one of the things we heard on the State of the Union the other night is that one of the ways of retaining officers may be to help them with their housing. As one of the things she said is that you were going to try to retrain by helping them with their housing. And they are worthy, but these guys are worthy as well. Those 1080 are worthy as well, because they're young people. And so we went looking for other properties that were similar to these properties, where I think it's Sanford who has all of these properties, who he doesn't keep up, he falls into foreclosure, etc. And so there are these large properties out there in the world, and when they default, they could be used for housing the 1080. Just let us get a little further down. And so, one of the things that was a learning for this group, which had not been a learning for the previous group that you were with, was each one of them have a thesis, and each one of them has a problem, and each one of them has an agency. And so down there at the end, when they look at the mean, their challenge was is to find out when we had implemented that best practice, and then look at the amount of recidivism prior to the implementation of our best practice in the city, and look at the recidivism after. So they had a before-after comparison. There was no difference between the implementation of the best practice before and after for crime in the city. There was a difference between before and after for most of them on recidivism. On recidivism, but not on crime. You can pick, it's affecting one, but not the other. And so they began to understand that it wasn't going to be doing one thing. It was going to be doing a combination of all of their stuff. For this class really tried to figure out if all of our stuff gets combined, do we get an effect if all of our stuff gets combined? What did you have? You had
School to prison.
school to prison.
Pipeline.
So you see, we're adding in a whole lot of stuff. And we come up with this holistic conversation that we're now trying to have with you that we didn't have with you last year. Do you want to do this one?
That's not working. She goes. Oh, you're working?
Yeah.
Okay. Am I in front of your camera? No. Stay in front. Good morning. I'm Cheryl Crawley-Nalatasi. As you heard the professor say, and as you see, my colleagues, and we all, as she was stating, the professor, Edwina Dorch, was stating that each one of my colleagues have taken a push, just like the Sean, you addressed what your project was.
Right, which is school suspension.
Okay, yes, and each of us were in pairs, just like mine was like sentencing reform. And as we were looking at all of this here now at the end, and this is our senior project, and we found out that it's just not an individual agency or issue. It's a collaborative where we all share this together as a community. And as we can see the topic here, UDC Workforce Development, the anchor institution, we are an anchor institution. And what I mean by anchor institutions, that could be like a large institution that has something to do with a lot of people, a lot of faculty, janitor workers, hospital workers, cafeteria workers, etc. And as you can see, you have other institutions that are just as powerful as an anchor institution, and they're not public, they're not private, they're nonprofit. And also, as you can see, we have 3 columns here. And you have like the mentor, navigators, which they are nonprofits as well, and they provide services like for transportation, like for those that are in need. And then we go over here, we have the housing, which provides housing, which also, each one of these are still nonprofits. They're not federal, they're not state, they are just private and nonprofit organizations. And then, of course, we do need our corporate sponsors as well here. Now, as we can see, the communities, we see housing. And within these housings, we also see the communities. And what the whole purpose of this is, when we see the people in housing, is that we want to be able to bring families back together, right? Especially returning citizens. And I really want to focus here on the hubs. And what I mean by hubs, these little windows here are hubs. Each one of these costs about $42,000 to build one hub, which is a 2-bedroom facility. And why I said a 2-bedroom facility is because most, which is about 65% males that are arrested, however, they have families. And sometimes when they get out, they would like to still reconnect with their families. So we suggested that a 2nd bedroom be in these hubs so that they'd be able to have their family, be able to spend time with their family and rebuild their family connections. So these are the hubs, and as we can see right down below here, and let me go back up a little bit because we wanted to say, because Ayers, this is one of his main areas, and Ayers back there in the corner. We want to talk about, thank you, Ayer. We want to talk about the fact that in your communities you have vacant properties. And when you have a vacant property or it's torn down or something, that makes property value goes down. So they feel as though that if you give the returning citizens that property, you know, since a lot of people thinks about having returning citizens in the community, if those properties can be taken back and given to those returning citizens to build these hubs, and within those will make the property value goes up. Because within those hubs, down along in here, you can provide all these services that returning citizens who are really the people that really built their community, they can also work within their community. You can still provide all the services within their hub community where they don't have to go outside. That means the philanthropies that provides them the transportation services to take them to and from where they need to go to, as well as you can also have, which would be housing. You would also have some of the corporate sponsors that have something to do within the hubs here. Because remember, the corporate sponsors is the ones that help us get funding as well. So we need those. So they were feeling as though that if they happen to have these agencies within their hub, and also another thing, training. Training is very important because that helps put them back into the workforce community. And also within that training can help them re-beautify their communities and so forth.
All right. So back up one, Jez. Thank you.
Ms. Crowley.
You want me to stay here?
Go ahead.
She was in the classroom and taught us how to do neighborhood watch, and so she's on here as well when we get to your slide on policing.
So, my name is Jasmine. We wanted to look at what the ordinary DC resident can do, like such as myself, everyone in the classroom. Like if we look outside of our jobs and just look at ourselves as a member of the community. So GW did a research where they found that DC is made up of mainly small funds and not large funds. So we don't have these big corporations that can donate, such as Microsoft. So, because DC has mainly federal workers. So we wanted to get the federal employees involved and see how they could help us with getting our returning citizens back on the right track. So my first example was Giving Days. So one day on the calendar, we wanted to take one day out of the year where we designated to helping out our returning citizens. So one day out of the year, everyone could give money or
in
donate
the whole city.
Throughout the entire city. It'll be like something like a holiday that is a given day where everyone donates money back to a returning citizen. Another suggestion we had was peer-to-peer funding. So we thought that it would be more personal if it came from person to person instead of hiring an outside contractor or someone to get people to donate. I can go to Terrell and say, hey, Terrell, I donated to this foundation and I think it's really great, so can you help me with donating?
And this is the way that nonprofits are doing it these days. It used to be that nonprofits would hire a crew, some employees, and their employees would gather funds. Now they know that I'm an advocate, so they come to Edwina Dorch and they say, Edwina, go, you hang out with those people, get those people to give money, peer to peer. Peer me to my peer. I am better able to get money the nonprofits are finding than to hire staff to do it.
So another one we had was credit card donations. So an example I used a couple of classes ago was when you go to Walmart, what's the thing that you buy from Walmart?
Last thing I bought at Walmart was a bike for my cat.
And how much was that? Like,
$70.
so say if it was $70 and maybe 90 cents. So what happens is automatically they'll round it up to that next dollar. So instead of you paying $70.90, you would pay $71, and we would take that 10 cents and donate it back to returning citizens. So that's a way that something that it can happen automatically, and most likely you're not going to see that much of an increase, and you won't even really notice that you're donating that 10 cents. Another way was mobile phone donations.
Have you seen an example of that? Did that idea come from an example you
Yeah,
seen?
that's an example. We can give you these slides so that you can see where we got each one of those from.
Another one was mobile phone donations. So now everyone is using phones all day long. Like, our phone is hooked to our hip. We never go anywhere without our phone. We're tripping if our phone is dying, looking for an outlet to charge our phone in. So on phones, we have applications now. Everyone needs to get an app. People aren't going in to places to fill out stuff anymore. They're going on their phone and say, oh, I want to rent a car. Let me go online. No, I'm not going online. I'm going to just click the Enterprise app and I'll rent a car. So for the phone donations, what we suggested was implementing an app where that you can donate to the returning citizen. So you just open your phone up and click on that app. And it's already on your phone. It's not like you have to go online and look it up. The app is already on your phone. Another one was the time bank. Eric didn't talk about it. Coley talked about that earlier. So he explained where you have to give time back. So say that I wanted to work with people that were looking to get a GED, and say I'm good in English. So I'll go and I'll read to them and help them with their reading, and then I'll write it down, or I jot down the time, and later on
has software that you would log it on.
Yeah, and I log it onto the computer, and then later on, when I need some help with maybe gardening in the community, I want to go and beautify the city, as Cheryl said earlier. That same returning citizen or someone else would come and help me out. Since I gave my time back, I'll get that time back. So essentially, we have a lot of private corporations in DC, so we want those private corporations to get involved and implement programs where they can get individuals that work for them to volunteer. So one example was the $1 for Doers. Another example was paid release days, pay for success grants, and pro bono work.
So you see the class really got involved in how can I save you some money? What are all the ways, look at all this number of ways that they all come up with for how to do your job, get the job done without using public money. Can you skip that one? Yeah. So, in the past when we've spoken to you, notice that this is the ladder of citizen participation. Over and over again, we do consultation with you where we tell you about what we're thinking, but we never seem to graduate up into partnership with you, and that's what we're trying to do this year, is to graduate from consultation up the ladder to partnership. And we really feel as though CJCC was here in the room like you are. Manon Butler and Mr. Diaz, her assistant, were here, along with Brian Ferguson. They were here.
When were they here?
March 22nd.
Okay, so we started
Last week on Monday.
So we feel like with respect to them, we have not graduated to partnership at all. So we, the conversation that we want to begin to have with you is a conversation about partnership. And we've seen so many people in the classroom by now. Edgar Kahn, he's down at the law school. He's the one that created time banks. Time banks are all over the nation now. We have a time bank BC, which he could set it up for you to get. So all of these people that you saw on there have come to the classroom and have seen this presentation. And they know what we would like to do, the partnership that we would like to have, where we grow national community service. So that they're very geared, this city itself is very geared towards youth, and that's wonderful. But to have a conversation with them about what can we do for returning citizens with your senior corps, with your Vista Corps. Can we make something here in the city that's for returning citizens on that? And so you saw this slide last year where we were saying, we're trying to have a conversation and we're not being successful at having the conversation. We're just doing consultation where we present something, but we don't go any further.
What's the word between consultation and partnership? I can't read it.
Placation, where you pat us on the head, you say,
Oh.
oh, you guys can add. You guys can. That's so cute. That's so cute, your little thesis project. Placation. So, next slide. So what about the broken system? This word was used by the outgoing police chief, not by us, or at least the Washington Post reports that she said it was broken. And so you remember we talked to you about DCAS, and here we are back here talking to you about DCAS once again. DCAS is one of these 360 systems. It was created by, the 360s were created by Microsoft. When we went under the Affordable Care Act, every state had to build, if they accepted Medicare, they had to build themselves a IT system. We paid $49 million, next one, for our IT system here on Medicaid. And the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee has something called Justice. And what we said to you last time, and we say to you again, why is it that we can't marry these two systems? A $49 million system ought to be capable of talking to the justice system, so that you're then capable of seeing when he travels from being arrested to jailed to court, but you're watching his TANF, his food stamps, his Medicaid, because all of those will impact whether or not he recidivates again, we believe. And so the same conversation we had last time, we're having with you again about DCAS. She's sick. She's sick today. She had Medicaid was her, and she was watching what happens when they come to jail and they're carrying Medicaid versus when we release them, they got to pick Medicaid up again. So this was her project. So she began by trying to find out how many states had accepted Medicaid. We were one of the states that accepted the Affordable Care Act and the Medicaid expansion. Then she tried to see if we were one of the states that best practice. She was looking for the best practice here, and she understood that you should suspend Medicaid, not terminate Medicaid. So there are some states that are suspending and some states that are terminating. Here, just as she was going through from fall semester to spring semester in October, you guys started with suspension of Medicaid and picked up the best practice. She thought she was going to have to write her senior paper with we were not using best practice, but you can see how best practice became a part of her thesis. And then when we accepted the Medicaid expansion, we go to suspending rather than terminating. We're on DC HealthLink. And so she begins to watch as they move from prison to jail to community supervision. This was the person that we contacted. This person said it'd be simple for us to do what you guys are thinking of. But when we took it to Manon Butler did not appreciate the fact that it would be easy to get DCAS to speak to justice. And this all might change in the next few years. This lady was with mental health. Also, mental health is in the room. She had 3 problems. One of her problems is because she's mental health, she's got to get that Medicaid turned off and on. A second problem that she has is that she has to, they have housing issues. The mentally ill have housing issues. And what she could see is that we don't have enough housing for our mentally ill, our mentally ill returning citizens. But she understood that over at CSOSA, the pop was going down, and thereby it was a way to retrieve that money. And so she's saying, once again, the Office of Partnerships and Grants should have been involved in order to find grant money in order for us to increase the amount of mental health housing. Or the Justice Reinvestment Act grant. These are 2 different organizations. Next slide, please. One that should be especially to your heart, Ms. Pearson. She's here with us on Wednesdays. I have Monday students and Wednesday students, and so part of the reason why they're not here is because you came on a Monday and they're here on Wednesday, and I'm doing their slide for them. And so she looked at homicide. She saw that it had been steep at one point. It had been substantially up. It had dropped, gone up when everybody got concerned about it, but as you know, it went down again. And so that was part of her thesis that she was looking at. When she understood that there was a problem in the city with respect to the amount of homicides, she went to the National Institute of Justice. Now she has readings, so that's what leads her to the various sites. So she goes to the National Institute of Justice and she looks up, you can put in this data bank that they have, and it'll tell you the one that you're looking at, it'll tell you whether it's best practice, promising practice, effective practice. And so what we knew is that this one that we were about to use, that was coming out of Richmond, California. So we but we also knew that this one was very similar to this one. This is a public health model, CURE is. And this one is the public health model plus paying folks. And so we put them both in, and it showed both of them as promising practices. Once she knew that, this has implications for what she's doing on her senior thesis, because she's got 2 that are not effective practices, but both promising practices. And so in her thesis, she's going to be saying, I would go with CURE since I have so much outrage about the other one. In her thesis, she will be saying that. And it was unfunded, I guess, in part because everybody wasn't on board with the philosophy behind it. But then she becomes really interested in this thing that's carried on the National Institute for Justice, collective efficacy. We all became interested in collective efficacy, and what it turns out to, when you read the theory behind it, is very much like Neighborhood Watch. And so we invited Neighborhood Watch in. And the thing that Neighborhood Watch didn't have, which is Jasmine's senior thesis is on Neighborhood Watch, is it doesn't have the Neighborhood Watch apps. And so she's picked up like 6 Neighborhood Watch apps and we sent them over after she left to show her that she trained us on how she does Neighborhood Watch, but none of it included the apps, and that's one of the recommendations that she's going to be making in her. And she's one of the people that's going to go up for the award this year. But she won't get this award, nor will AIR get this award if you say, I see it, but whatever, I don't care. Nice little people. You do nice little addition and subtraction. So she's hoping that you will understand that the primary person that does your Neighborhood Watch training for you And one of the things you're going to be saying, I've read it because at midterm they turn in, before they turn it in for final, is one of the things that she's going to be saying is not only do they need to incorporate the apps into what her training does, but they don't have enough of her.
Yeah, when she came in, she talked about how she was the neighborhood watch person for the entire city.
Who came in?
Nolan.
Samantha Nolan.
Okay.
And she talked about how she didn't have many people helping her, so she was basically taking the initiative and doing it all by herself.
So you really need
Training.
more of her.
Yeah.
Training and all of
Suggested
that.
having
But see,
more
this is
people.
one of these non-money things, we think, that you could pick up through all of these things that we suggested to you.
I talked to her, and I know she said she's retired now, so someone else is taking over that, but they need some help.
So this is all of us together and all of our work together, and each one of them, like, where are you, Jasmine?
Second.
And so it tells you what she was MPD was her agency she was attending to. She tells you the performance measure that you should be using, and she tells you the funding on it. So each one of them said that all together. We'll give you one of these.
I would like that.
Actually, it's on the door over there to remind us all, along with the one that's there in the back, where you can see all of the agencies that they were assigned to. And it was our first slide that was up, and it showed you that the way they were selecting is, notice that it has a key, and this belongs to the mayor, the blues, and this belongs to the federal government. And so when they were selecting the first day with me where they wanted to be, they were actually selecting whether or not they wanted to be with something that the mayor has supervision over or not.